All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the March 26th Tinderbox Meetup. As always, we talk all things Tinderbox and learning and personal knowledge management. And our goal today is to kind of go, the way we kind of go about doing it is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. We then will dig into what particular projects that people may that are working on and any particular questions that they have. And then we dig into the predefined agenda if there is one. And actually today there is a predefined agenda. There is kind of doing project management with Tinderbox. So we're going to want to dig into that as well. But let's go around the room. I don't know who Zoom 9314 is. That's a name I've not really heard before. So who's 9134? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Michael. It's TBX 1513 as far as that's my forum handle. Essentially, yeah, I just got a whole schema that I use for a lot of my naming conventions.
Yeah,
for
welcome.
Things.
Yeah. Welcome. All right, good. So I was hoping you'd show up because you're the inspiration for this entire call. So
yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I guess a little intro. I purchased Tinderbox several years ago, but I can never really use it for my daily workflow. Like I've heard from many others, and really it wasn't any fault with Tinderbox. It was just me not spending enough time and dedicating, energies to actually learning the ins and outs and how I might apply it. And what I'm looking to use it for is really, like you said earlier, project management, but knowledge management, and seeing how I can, possibly use it for, deliverables and different things that I actually use with my clients, or for studying different certifications related to platforms that I manage. So that's kind of the gist of things. And the other thing I just wanted to say, I just want to thank everybody, amazing forum. I appreciate all the help and quick answers that I've gotten from everyone. I mean, yourself, Mark Anderson, Mark, Bernstein, and just many, many others in the short period of time that I've been here. So thanks.
Awesome. And who is thank you very much for that. And we'll just keep digging in. Yeah, this is by far the best community I've ever come across. It's pretty darn awesome. And iPhone 16, it's a 168. Brief introduction, just so we know who you are. All right, okay, and if you can't get off mute, that's fine. We'll just keep moving forward. Let me get a file saved here, and then we'll move forward. Devin, think. All right, I've got some TBX lesson. Sorry, I'm just taking a note here. Can't type and think at the same time, it appears. All right, so great. So anybody, let's go around. Does anyone have any projects they're working on, comments, thoughts and ideas they want to share?
Oh, of course, Michael, you've already talked about this. We're working on a project, essentially Carol Olivia Incorporated project management system, trying to get I feel like I can't get anything done because there's always something on the outside of the universe. So I'm trying to get a Tinderbox plus universe that includes everything, and working with you. And it's already helping because just to be able to know what, the categories and the tasks that need to be done for each one. I hope you go in. I'd like to, what I'd like to do more is, you've already fixed one problem, which is when it's done, I want to get rid of it, but not lose it completely. That's you already fixed just now. And the other problem is, I would love to get a priority kind of thing for tasks.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so I can click on it and say what has to be done. It's almost like I need two categories: one for the tasks that have to be done every day, or my life falls apart. Yeah. There are other tasks that are due in 2 months, but if I don't work on them regularly, when the day comes, it's going to be a total failure. So there needs to be a way of accessing both of those.
That's really good. Okay.
Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, let me find today's meetup, by the way, so I can, where'd it go? So I can get our schedule. Who's got the link to today's meetup? I don't see it. I let it drop off the chat. March 26th. There it is. I found it. No. Where is
today's meetup? Was just a repeat of the one from last week, with the new date added.
Yeah, no, I had a whole description on it.
Okay.
Where'd it go? I gotta find it.
You need a project management system.
Yeah, no, I actually had it pinned on the top of the thing, and then it looks like the pin had done. So why don't we do this? Do you? Oh, I know where to find it. I think it's going to be in my pre-planned notes. That would be shocking if I was actually pre-organized for today's call.
I could try to grab it as well, Mike.
Yeah. So why don't you share your screen if you don't mind, and let's walk through your Word file, and so you can just kind of walk through your how you're defining a project.
Actually, I'm not going to be able to do that, so I don't know. Give me
Well,
a
let me.
second.
Let me find your Word file then, because
Yeah,
that's
it
what.
was in the agenda.
Yeah, I
as
know,
an
but I just said I
attachment.
was looking for the agenda and I can't find it. So if someone can help me find it, I would appreciate
Yep,
it.
and that's what I was trying to do. You got it.
Where is it? I had it and it's not there.
I
No,
pasted it in the chat.
got it. Perfect, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I think you copied and pasted everything in the forum and it didn't format well. So maybe in
I
the Word
did.
document,
It
open
looks
it
like
up.
that got deleted or something. That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, I
Where?
wasn't able to pull it up either.
There it is. Okay, got it. Okay. All right. So here is the projects for the day, and then Cara Olivia, you just added one, so let's go so we don't lose it. Let's go. Your requirement is to be able to track closed tasks, and then your other requirement was actually, let's use bullets. Your other requirement was the ability to basically create subtasks for long-term projects. So
Yeah,
that long-term projects.
Well, yes, I guess I'm already creating subtasks for projects. I would like to be able to access due dates for long-term versus short-term projects. Because
Okay.
what I tend to do, wake up in the morning and say, what's if I don't do this, I'll be shot at dawn. So let me do that first.
Yeah, and we don't want that. All right, that's probably
Yes,
not.
and what happens is then 2 months later, there's something I've had to learn, say in another language. You can't learn that overnight. You've got to do it, practice it every day. I want to be able to say, okay, you got to spend at least 1 hour, working with Greek or with whatever,
Okay.
in addition to these short-term things.
All right. So let's do this while we do that. Let's kind of pull through and start developing our project management requirements. So one is manage list of projects for sure.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's one of our requirements, tracking, and then another massive requirement would be tracking tasks associated with a project. And then there are some sub requirements to those.
Mhm.
And who else has any other thoughts or ideas about? And if we can, in the chat, if someone can help me manage these, that would be great. Oops. Come on.
I threw in the chat the idea of linking tasks to book citations that gave you the idea for the task and an example of it being done in real life.
Okay, linking tasks to how about attributing tasks to inspiration or discovery source.
Yeah, because I want to link to the source
And
that gave the example of the task.
Source. Well, I mean, there are two different things there, right? So there's what I can attribute the inspiration or discovery to, and then there's citing to a source. And I think sometimes those are two often very different things, and or sources, because so attributing task to inspiration, discovery source, and then citing to source or sources.
I guess sources would be.
Citing to source or sources, because that what I find is they're often converging sources. Okay, so that's another one, and let's go through our TBX. All right, so TBX 1513 had suggested these things. So let's kind of go through this and see how we want to capture them, and then we can start breaking it down. So detailed requirements, brain dump. So tracking tasks we just got, citations and references we've got, platform artifacts. So what does this mean? Can you walk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, because essentially part of this was I'm documenting a platform that I manage, and part of that is creating deliverables for clients, but also for studying for different certifications. I have to get certified in different areas constantly. So how to have a one-stop knowledge management cubbyhole, essentially, where that I could be able to create best practices or different documents and export those, but also maybe do dumps and exports to Anki for studying certain materials. So artifacts would be like, because basically it's a relational database, different things that are inherent applications, tables, those kinds of things.
Okay. I get what you're saying, but I'm trying to organize it into requirements. So like one of the things I heard you is, the ability to export and vary the export format.
Yeah, so that's why if you open up the Word document, it'll probably be easier to follow along than this hodgepodge kind of paste. But essentially, it's broken down in that way. There's an import, there's an export section. The native format will probably be more conducive.
But where is the Word document?
It's
Again,
attached to, if you go back to today's post. Yeah, well, not today's post, but the Meetup post. It's a zip file with a Word. That's where you copied it out originally.
Got it. All right, let me save this off somewhere.
It just might help a little navigating.
Sure.
Yeah, and again, my original post was, I wasn't looking for, I mean, you took it in a great direction, but originally it was just kind of like, hey, any words of advice, best practices when you're setting up a file in general. And then I think you kind of took it to, how do we do project management with it, which is of interest to me as well. But again, the context of what I put together was more of a brain dump roadmap of aspirational things I wanted to accomplish. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But and again, maybe I misconstrued it a bit when I took it to the level of project management. But that's kind of what I interpreted what you're saying. If you've got all these things you're trying to learn, all these things you're trying to do, all these things you're trying to manage, in my mind, that's project. You're basically separating a bunch of activities into different sections, organizing them, and then trying to get it.
Agreed. And even I use the word project/file, right? Because file is kind of a project in my mind. So I agree.
Right.
I think it interesting because the two of us had a Zoom call the other day, and one of the things I think that feeds into this, that's sort of sitting on the side of it, is over abstraction. Well, basically getting the right level of abstraction where you don't drown yourself in detail. So you've got a document that's swimming in information, and it's actually beginning to stop you doing the very analytical sort of understanding, knowledge, sense-making stuff you wanted to do. And of course, there's no one-size-fits-all rule to that. But I think it sort of plays into probably what's being discussed.
So another big one, as we think about warnings, right, when you're doing this kind of work, especially with Tinderbox, is over abstraction. And another one of my favorite Mark Anderson isms, and I don't think this is yours actually. Maybe you can drop it in the chat, Mark, because you've got a great link for this, is premature formalization. Right. And I think one of the things that, excuse the typos. One of the things that we really struggle with when we turn to this type of knowledge management is we try to create a hierarchy, formalized, constructed structure. What was I trying to, not over extraction, what was I trying to say for this first one?
Abstraction.
Abstraction, there you go. Right. So premature formalization in a project could end up just being the kiss of death. And if you trust Tinderbox and realize that you can formalize incrementally along the way, it helps out tremendously, as we'll find when we go through the process. So I too use OmniFocus, by the way, and we can't get into all of this today, but there are ways, for example, to use AppleScript. And I've actually written a handful of Apple scripts that will push notes from OmniFocus from Tinderbox to OmniFocus. The challenge is in that point of premature formalization, OmniFocus's data model is very, very rigid, and it basically has project, subproject, blah, blah, blah. And if you don't get that, if you don't follow that rigidity right, importing stuff into OmniFocus can get really difficult, and then syncing it back is almost impossible, is from what I found. So there's some interesting things to be thinking about that. But let's start with getting tasks organized in Tinderbox, and then we can think about how we move it to other places. Tracking and citation references. I've got tons of videos on doing that. In turn, my primary tool of choice is Zotero, but others use EndNotes, and then there's a whole host of other open source citation management methods that we can do, but we certainly can talk about that. Producing and managing lists. So let's talk about this a little bit. Can you walk us through this? I think that's what you were just referring to.
Yeah, the first one was, the platform that, obviously it's got different tables, roles, different scripts that are out of the box or ones that users have created by application. So that's kind of what the artifacts are. And then the products are there's.
So again, let's pause here for language though. When you say the platform, can you give us an example so we have some
Yeah, it's a cloud-based IT automation or platform, essentially, that it's SaaS and PaaS at the same time, but essentially it's something that different enterprises can use to create workflows, manage user experiences, and they could also create their own applications within the platform as well. And I kind of want to. There's this, but I want to be able to use this for different systems or tools that I kind of manage and
right
as well.
So within that platform or any other kind of product or program, I mean, for me, this is all documenting or collating reusable, accessible resources. So
exactly,
tables, concepts, scripts, roles. These are all kind of discrete atomic artifacts that can stand alone, independent of anything else.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do is there's like a wiki for each platform, and I want to take an existing, the knowledge piece of it and tie it together to the actual technical artifacts like the table and then the references. So I'm trying to, make it my own personal wiki, but also have the data that is in the platform itself. Like as an example, you have a particular table, and out of the box, maybe the table gives certain roles or certain accessibility and how to have a real world extraction from a database, and then the knowledge piece and time together with linkages.
Got it. And I hesitate with great regret to saying this, but when words really matter and definitions of words really matter, and David Edy's going to start hopping around in his seat. But when we refer the word table, that can mean, that word alone can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on how we interpret that.
Well, it's a relationship. It's a relational database, so it's really on one definition. It's a database table.
I understand that, but bringing that into Tinderbox, I mean, a table.
Totally.
It's nothing more than just a bunch of attributes assembled in a certain way.
Well, exactly, and that's the way I've been bringing them in, and that's the reason why I got hundreds, of attributes. So it basically comes in as one note with a whole bunch of attributes for a record, right? So you've got maybe 50 attributes defined on that table, and for every single record, which would be a note, those are carrying over, right?
Got it. Okay, so there's a certain level of confidentiality and privateness to your project that we're gonna struggle with doing publicly, because we can't really see your stuff, but we can work through this as best we can. And so what I'm hearing then for you is essentially this whole section is. And when you're calling producing lists, it's really about creating artifact atomic notes of ideas that have information associated with them. And then therefore you can then start managing structured output. Mr. Chuck.
Yep.
So I just wanted to make a forward reference to some of the conversation here. I've been dealing with some similar problems, and the comment that was just made about acquiring hundreds of attributes is a problem I've run smack dab into, which is if I'm working with a platform which happens to be a network, a piece of network equipment, and I'm trying to use Tinderbox to evaluate the configurations of that system. If I just bring in the configuration templates, if you will, I can easily generate thousands of attributes. And so one of the things that I'm wrestling with, and I suspect other people would wrestle with, is how do you dig into something like this and be smart about how you accumulate attributes, which attributes really matter, and how do you find the always overlapping attributes that, you know, it appears to be something different, but is really the same thing. And I think that's a challenge of doing this kind of work. And I don't mean to tack it on to today's discussion. I just put it forward as a something for others to think about as they dive into this, that you might just want to be a little bit cognizant of how quickly this can get beyond a reasonable approach within Tinderbox if you don't think it through.
Well, and to your point, Chuck, I mean, like, and if we go back to even like 2-3 years ago when I first started, you know, I was reporting that I'd have 600-700 attributes in my Tinderbox files.
Right.
And that was fine for, and again, let's David's gonna smile here, but you know, when I think about, you know, just the idea of, do I call it company, do I call it organization, do I call it entity, do I call it nonprofit, do I call it this, do I call it that? And for me, you know, and again, this is where premature formalization and incremental formalization really come into play when you're playing with Tinderbox. The great thing about Tinderbox is it does, at the beginning, it doesn't matter. Go for it. 700 attributes. That's great, right? As you go through the process, what works for you, I found for me, the word entity works better than organization, company, enterprise, etc. because or government, because for me, the overarching concept is you've got an entity, which is a group of people and activities and initiatives that then can be later refined by other sub attributes. So the primary attribute is entity, or my primary prototype is entity. And then there's a type on that prototype that says, well, this entity is a government. This entity is a nonprofit. This entity and nonprofit's weird too, because this entity is an enterprise, but then what's its tax status? Is it a for-profit or a nonprofit? So those are the kinds of, you know, genus, phylum, species, Darwinian origin of species, you know, stuff that you'll go through as you're doing your knowledge management work. And that's the whole point of this exercise, is you'll get close to your data and you'll figure out that what works right for you. Go ahead, Chuck, do you respond to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. Your reference to the term entity is interesting, because I worked at various points in my career in network standards. And one of the funny things that happened along the way is everybody said, well, you know, what do we call this thing in the network protocol stack? You know, and people would, we should call it an object. Well, but you know, an object, that means something to the people who are doing object-oriented programming. We can't call it an object. So eventually everybody sort of said, well, we'll call it an entity.
Yeah.
And everything became an entity. And you know, if you go into the literature of networking systems, it's amazing how many things are called entities. So the whole value of the term just evaporated, because it got overused, because it was basically anything I don't have a good description for.
Right. And again, that's where you just need to own your data. When you're building a Tinderbox file and you're working on the projects like this, come up with whatever name you want. You know,
Right. So if you're doing collaboration with other people, that problem becomes much more difficult.
It does, but then that's why.
Just a forward reference.
But then that's why. And again, if you go back to some of my previous discussions, that's why you have a resources directory. That's why you have 3 categories. For me, those categories, and again, these are the ones I've made: terms, category, themes. And guess what?
Right.
When you do the linking and you roll up and down the chain, you're creating your own glossary of terms in real time that you then can
I completely agree with what you're saying, and I just was pointing out that you know, this remains, naming and defining things remains a difficult problem, and anybody who steps into doing this kind of work of knowledge management just needs to keep that in front of their mind, that you know, they will need to change the names as they go along. I think.
Okay, and again, Carolyn and Mark, I'll come to you in a minute. David's just screaming to say something because this is his baby. Go for it, David.
I apologize. I'm going to have to eat my words, Michael. I was trying to stay away from this topic because I've been tilting at this stupid windmill for 40 years. And basically everybody else has given up, as it's unsolvable. And it's not unsolvable. The discussions here of think about the future you. I mean, you name it this today, and in 2 months, you're going to have no idea what that name means. You've completely forgotten it. And then glossaries. I only want the language of this problem in this code base. Yeah. I'm working on an accounts receivable system. I don't want baseball, German, anything. I only want accounts receivable terminology. End of rant.
Yeah. So again, so long story short, this is really, and so when you're going through project planning like this, and we'll dump into a Tinderbox file in just a minute to get ourselves started. But it does kind of help you a little bit to know where you want to go or how you're going to get there, just for your future self to be more efficient. But in the early self and in the learning self, doesn't really matter because you can update and modify as you go along. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I just circle back on this thing about this problem of ending up with I think ending up with an awful lot of attributes and things is a sort of code smell of over abstraction. It's not an error. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's not because you've done a bad thing. What you've shown yourself is you've probably extracted too much stuff. And I think the sweet spot is, and you know, it's going to be particular to any user. You can't really generalize, but it's finding the sweet spot where you've got enough abstraction that you can do stuff with it in Tinderbox without being drowning in detail you didn't need. And one of the things I discussed with Zoom 9314 is the fact that, you know, don't overlook the fact that maybe you can change things at the other end. So for instance, when you have, you know, a note can very often be a proxy for something. How much of something you make it a proxy for is your choice. I think often we sort of overload ourselves. Oh, I must replicate everything because I don't know what I need. I think experience has taught me that that way tends to lead to unintentional overload. And the difficult thing is sort of giving yourself the freedom to just experiment a bit. So, oh, okay, I need more detail here, I need less detail there. And to think about how that detail has been delivered to you. Because if you've got a note that, say, stands proxy for a database table, do you need every part of that database table? Or do you need basically just perhaps a URL that when you click it goes to an API that delivers you, I don't know, a diagram or a page of detailed explanation about it so that you have it when you need it, but it's not just gumming up the works of your Tinderbox that every time you've got to do a broad query, all has to be looked at for no good reason. So there are and I mentioned the latter because that's another unseen side of the gummage that occurs when you over abstract. If you bring an awful lot of information in, every time you want to do any sort of a broad search, you're searching an awful lot of data that shouldn't be there in the first place. But I just close out the comment by saying, you know, I think the wrong way to look at this is in terms of error and castigating yourself for that. It's just not obvious before the fact, and just be open to the fact that you can play around with the level of abstraction.
Yeah, it's exploration is what you're doing. There's no error in exploration. You're exploring by definition, and to that point too, unless and I guess this is the other way I look at it when I think about Tinderbox is, I want the information in Tinderbox for me when it either needs to be archived or it can be operational. And if I don't actually need it for archiving or operational purposes and or the use in a particular time and place, then I want the reference to be able to get to it. For example, I'm not going to put my entire DevonThink repository of PDF files in every single one of my Tinderboxes, but I may need the handful of links to those PDF files in those DevonThink files, as Mark Anderson said, so I can get back to them quickly. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to be thinking about. Cara Olivia, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, yes, I'm having a little trouble. To me, this sounds like a really profound philosophical discussion that doesn't relate to anything I'm ever going to do in my life. But listening to you talk about it and looking at the outline here, I feel that if I knew where this was going or where it came from, that I could figure out a way to apply it to my own work. And I'm not getting that. And maybe it's because it's top secret. Like Zoom 9314 sounds like to me a complex table walked up to your door one day, knocked on the door, and walked in and said, "Take care of me." It's like that's philosophy. That's not work. In my and pretend that a really in the cloud poet just walked in and said, "Okay, what are you doing? Can you give me 30 seconds of that?" I don't understand where we're going, what it's for.
Well, and that's what I was really worried about with this entire file, because it was meant to be a brain dump of here's what I'm looking to try to do, and not to be covered in one meetup, just to let you know.
Okay.
So, and I think what ended up happening was it kind of got copied and pasted, and then we're kind of running with it. but there were different areas, right? You know, here's the kind of the content that I'd like to bring in the Tinderbox, and here's what I'm looking to do with it. And like you guys said, it's very aspirational at this point. Like I'm trying to still figure out what can Tinderbox do for me? What is the art of the possible? So do I bring in a table and have it all as, you know, all these attributes that mirror attributes that are in the database? Or do I have separate notes? Do I need all of those attributes? Like right now, it's just what, you know, I'm doing a lot of pressure testing. What can I do? What's scalable? And trying to figure things out. But the gist of things are, here's the type of information I'm looking to bring in. There's basically a platform and some of the, basically the structure of that platform, the features of that platform. I want to kind of bring in, like Michael was saying, to have a reference and be able to have actionable data that I could, you know, basically tie into a learning experience, which would be to part with the Anki, right? And then also tie in known materials that are used for references for that platform. So if there's articles or different things that speak about a table or best practices or roles or different things, I'm trying to tie that as well. Now,
I think if I could just read that first paragraph, if you could just scroll that screen so I can see what it says, then it would help. Okay.
Oh, all right.
Okay. I don't, it's like, okay. So this is for you to be certified, or for others to be certified.
Well, that's the other piece of it. I have to get certified constantly for different applications that are being created, and I'm trying to constantly keep up with this. So a lot of the products that are produced within the platform are very similar. Every time a product is created, certain tables are installed, certain roles are provided. There's certain, things that are probably topics of study across everything that I want to kind of templatize or make into a template so that I could have structure for any new product that comes out. Here's the 80% that I have to, the basic things or foundational things I have to study. And then the next 20 is application and how to actually be an expert or a master in it.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
And this is why I keyed it to a project. So first and foremost, my kind of myopathy saw the word task and I immediately, a link associated that in my brain with project. But if I summarize what you just said, Zoom 9314, what you're looking to do is capture and learn information, be able to export that information, and manage tasks along the way for your and so your project is, I need to be learning about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to capture and learn this information, manage and curate this information in a whole bunch of different ways: qualitative, quantitatively, close reading, dark reading, referencing, linking, etc., and managing the tasks associated with that learning project.
And add in things that I've learned or tidbits of knowledge or things like, code snippets and stuff that, will help with that. And then just to let you know, Michael, like the first 3 bullets I really took from yours, I put it in the note. You had those in yours. I don't think I really had those in mine. That's why I've got a lot of red text here. So I wasn't really looking to track tasks and even citations and references, but it's good to know. And I definitely want to do it, but it wasn't on my main list of things. So.
All right. So really then, so the main objective here for you is, one is capture and learn from information you put in this. 2, produce and create reusable assets. And then and 3, be able to export that material, be able to get it out in consistent usable formats.
Yeah, so if you scroll down, like you could even see like, hey, I saw a lot of attributes coming, so manage attributes, color scheme, which is, again, it's something I played with and I've a custom color scheme, but that's just usability from my perspective. Code snippet library, that's scrolling away different things that I've applied. So that's going to be like a reference library, right? And then if you scroll down some more to the second page, it gets to, well, here's, it would be great to be able to pull this information instead of manually doing it every time. So like an integration or an import. And then you guys told me how easy it is to import things. And I played with that a little bit. Would it be nice to have an API and be able to pull this every time a new release or a new table is added? That would be nice. And then the export piece, major, it's really Anki, for the study piece. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, and there's a particular format for Anki, if you, it would be nice to be able to highlight certain text and have it spin right into an export template. And then the final piece was really just something I think you've covered numerous times, is using like Pandoc or something to be able to take the information, the raw information, and be able to spit it out into things that I can provide maybe clients or people on my team, people I manage in PowerPoint, Word files, mind maps, and that kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. So so in this concept, so let's kind of Carol, Olivia, anybody have any comments, questions before we kind of jump in? And let's pick one of these. So since task is not your priority, it seems like for me the priority is kind of creating and maybe we start with the Anki file. Maybe that's the best one, this kind of flashcard knowledge management method, because to your point, you're trying to learn about stuff. So we could try to start with that. Where would you guys, let's let community consensus drive this. Where would we like to start in jumping in and digging in with a, ingesting learning assets into a Tinderbox file? Don't all run at once, by the way, just saying.
I'll make a suggestion. I think actually the Anki thing might actually be quite useful because it's a very generalized pattern. And it also allows us to reflect on the thing that's being raised about it's the meta view. So you've got lots of detailed stuff, but there's a layer that you're trying to abstract, which is actually not that detail. It's how this detail changes from that.
And I agree. That's kind of why I jumped down to Anki immediately when I summarized. So okay, thank you for the vote of confidence there, Mark. So let's do that.
And you guys are good, because to be honest with you, that was probably my highest priority, but I was going to see how it played out. So
and before we kind of jump into that detail, I do want to provide a kind of midstream art of the possible example. Give me 90 seconds or 2 minutes to kind of give an art of the possible example when you're doing some kind of project. So I talked about this before, and this also reflects back to what we were working on last week in terms of like using inclusion elements when you're creating programs. So I have an event I'm programming for May 25th and up in London. And when you're looking at how do you organize an event? And this could be or learning a class. And so, I've got, people register, and then we're going to have lunch, and then we have a cocktail reception. And then in the morning, we're going to have some talks. In the afternoon, we'll have some talks. And then I've got some people I may need to find some space for. And then I've got a list of all of the speakers that I'm planning. And if you notice here, there's nothing here. So, look up my sleeves. It's magic. There's nothing up my sleeves. So when I start going through here, I'm thinking about, okay, well, how do I want this data run out? And I'll just give you examples. Here's like an export draft that I can send to Pandoc, which we won't get into today. And then I'm thinking about, all right, for this session that I'll be speaking on, right? So I've got a title for my talk. I'm going to be drafting up an abstract for my talk. It's TBD right now. There's this speaker, Michael Becker, that I'm going to have associated with this talk. And I want to point back to something really important here. Remember earlier in our conversation, Mark Anderson used the term proxy. And I think this is, and he and I were talking about this a few days ago. And I think this is a term that we're going to start really zeroing in on. So you'll notice here that I've got Michael Becker, the speaker, but I also have up here, Michael Becker, yet again, a speaker. So I've got Michael Becker in two places. I don't necessarily want to create two Michael Becker notes, because the core information about Michael Becker across those two notes is not going to be different. Name, email address, title, company name, all of that's going to be the same. So if you notice what I'm doing here in these files is, you'll see here, it says Michael Becker. Well, I've got an attribute I call person. And if I look at my action code, you'll see what I have happening in my action code is I'm calling a, where did I put it over here? I'm calling some link functions. Where's my link? Oh yeah. So I'm calling a speaker link function. And what that speaker link function does is that when it sees a person's name in that attribute, it automatically goes out and creates that person, links it to the note. And then if you'll also note here, I've got another function that says speaker update. So what that's doing is that's saying, I'm going to take the context of this speaker for this session on this day in this event, because for that note, that's what's unique to this note, Michael Becker in the context of this moment in time for this particular event and this particular idea. But for the fact of the matter though, Michael Becker though is all of these other elements otherwise. So if I go down here, you'll see here's my main Michael Becker note with all of his information. And then I can then link and see all of the different sessions that he's linked to. So, and I'll just give you a working example if I go and do that. So let's say I want to create another generic speaker. I can go speaker and we'll say to be determined. So if I have a to be determined speaker, and I'm going to give them the speaker prototype. Okay, so it already is speaker prototype. So speaker, to be determined speaker. So now I've got a placeholder that I know I want a speaker there. But when I start zeroing in on who that is, I just go ahead and type in Michael Becker, because that's an asset in my file that already exists. And when I do that and then click away, Tinderbox automatically connects to that existing note that is Michael Becker, and then populates this speaker note in association with this context. And this context is pulling in that session and that program. So this is an example of the ability to be able to create like these, have these, and again, just to show you this example, in all of my files, I've got, as we've seen before, I've got these resource folders where these are atomic notes that are discrete individual elements that then can be reused and repropagated across the rest of the file. So I'll go ahead and delete this one. So then you can start going, okay, this is really cool. So now I can manage my event and I can take notes as I meet with the different people participating within each of these different sessions. As I'm going through it, I can then start checking off boxes, identify the start times, end times, the duration of the talks. I mean, there's all of these kind of different things you can be doing in managing this project. And then you're going to say, well, then how do I start getting this information out? Well, then this is the power of Tinderbox. What I can start doing is I've got a template here that says, I now want you to go through and render all of the information of these different speakers and all of these notes into a laid out table. And then all of a sudden, there's the table being generated for all of those notes underneath that child, including pulling up the pictures of each of those different speakers. Then similarly, I can go, okay, well, maybe I want to do it for the entire day. And then for the entire day, Tinderbox then goes out and then using the inclusion methodology gives me, here's my morning session, here's my lunch, here's the TBD sponsor, here's the afternoon session. And then I've got yet another, and then here's the people I need to find a home for. And then I've got another function that then builds me this table on the fly of every one of the speakers and where they're at. And so this is the power of Tinderbox. What you can, and what you can do when you start thinking about the nature of how you're organizing your knowledge and putting it in there. Once you get it into a way that works for your brain and that works for your methods, you can get it in there and output it literally in any structure or form or appearance you want. So hopefully that kind of gives people some aspirational excitement to show that, it is possible and we can get there. Before we move forward on that, any other comments or reactions to what I just showed you guys there?
Oh, it's great.
Okay. So let's go ahead, and does anyone know what's the Anki website? Can anybody put it up on the let me see if I can just find it. Okay, Anki web. And what does a typical Anki, what's the info? Does anybody know what is the typical information that's in an Anki card?
Yeah, I've got it in the file. If you look, it's in there actually,
Okay,
for one of them at least, and it has links to parameters as far as so if you look down below examples of card format, a typical card, they call it a cloze, and you can click on those links as well, but those are just in their knowledge repository and import parameters and format. But the example of cards is basically there's a cloze, it's basically fill in, it blanks out a part of the note. So basically it's a closed format. So if you see the number 3 example of card formats, you'll scroll out a little bit more, then it'll actually show you that's what it's expecting. That's what, if you went to Anki and you were actually creating a card, that's what you would do. The text export from Tinderbox would be the capital of Georgia is, it would have those brackets, C1, basically, and then Atlanta will be hidden on the card. And then when you clicked it and tapped it, then it would show you what the answer is.
Okay, so let's pause right there. So I love what you're doing there, because you're showing us what your end result is that you want. This is kind of the output that I want. But before we end up with output, we need to think about what our input is.
Right, and the text in Tinderbox would be the input. Right?
Yes, Right. So
capital
what,
Georgia
yeah,
is Atlanta.
because the output will be an export template. The input is basically attributes and the content within those attributes. And that's what I've been talking about a long time for a while, and that the way we want to be able to be separating our content from structure and appearance. So when you're doing this, this is structure, and we're going to apply structure with export templates at the end of the process. Let's first focus on our content.
Well,
So-
and just to jump in, Michael, what I was envisioning was getting documents, there's two types of data in Tinderbox. One would be, say you have a PDF document and it has a definition. You've basically got your card. If you highlight that sentence and then you had an ability to say, I want this word to get those brackets, then that's going to be what's hidden. The rest of the sentence is just going to be the text on the card. Or maybe in Tinderbox, I want to craft a sentence that would be my card from scratch. But part of it would be,
Again,
you know,
for me, that's all structure. Let's start with.
but they wouldn't be attributes. They would be note content. So again,
No, but let's be clear. Note content is attributes. I think that let's pause right there, because I think that is a really important concept. If I click on here and I say note 1, right? Well, what is a note? A note is nothing more than a collection of attributes. You know, so for example, in this context, the notes that we're visually seeing right now is title and text. But Tinderbox has 524 system level attributes to which is that are associated with every single note, whether or not they're seen or not, because Tinderbox uses attributes to perform its own functions. And then Tinderbox, as we were talking about at the very beginning of the call, could have, I don't think anybody's really pushed the limit, but thousands of user generated attributes. I certainly have gone above 1,000 in one file. So let's talk, for all intents and purposes, as many as you want attributes. So every note has every attribute associated with it, whether or not it's a visible or not. And a note is nothing more than a collection of attributes.
yeah, and that's understood, Michael. Well, I was just saying in my use case, it's going to be in the text of a note in that one field consistently, or it's going to be in a PDF that I'm probably going to highlight and bring into that text of the note. But yeah, if you're thinking about scalable and solutions for many, and you're saying that it could be any value that is defined for any attribute within Tinderbox, it makes sense as well.
Well, and again, for those that are maybe listening to this recording too, I mean, I'm being a bit pedantic on this call, because I'm also assuming, both for my own future self, because part of the whole reason why I started these recordings is I forget. So I actually go back and watch my own lessons to remind myself what I was doing in the past. And also to the new people that are coming to the table first and are like, what's a note? What's an attribute? What does this all mean? So I the teacher in me can't help but reinforce some of these core points.
Michael, what you could do is, if you just add the note and the text as displayed attributes to the note, this might give us the meta lesson that it's just
let's look at that. Right, here is some text. Right, and I think the other thing that TBX 1513, what's also confusing me a little bit too is when you talk about bringing in a PDF. What does that in fact mean? I think what you're saying is I copy some text from a PDF that I've been reading, and there's text that I want to be reminding myself of, to which I now want to paste into text, and that will become part of the basis of my future Anki card.
Yeah, and again, simplistically, yeah, I was just saying that most of that in my, and again, will it change? Probably, but it would all be in the attribute of text, right? It would just be in the body of the note, what we would call, yeah.
Sure, but having been through this rodeo a handful of times too, for those that might be listening down this road, there are people that, and it's not necessarily there's anything wrong with this, because there really is nothing wrong in this learning and knowledge management process, but there are people that will want to drag an entire PDF file into text. And I don't think that's what you're saying when I say I go grab a PDF.
No,
I think what you're saying is I grab a few lines of text from a PDF and stick it in there. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that, because the other way around is, let me grab an entire 500 page, as Mark Anderson or Mark Bernstein will often refer to as well. You could literally copy the entire all of Moby Dick and drop it into text. That's fine, right? There's nothing that would keep you from doing that in Tinderbox. So now going back to Mark Anderson's recommendation, just to help emphasize this. So if I go to displayed attributes and I type text and I type name, right? There's the name of the note and there is the text of the note. So we're just happening to show in the attribute that is displayed attributes. And if I open up the inspector and I go to displayed attributes and I type the attribute displayed attributes, the value of the attribute displayed attributes is name and text. So if I actually go here too, and I now want to make displayed attributes a displayed attribute, whoops. So I'm now displaying the displayed attribute, and you'll also see that displayed attributes is now actually displayed attributes. In a really logical recursive loop going on there.
Yeah, I often do that.
Right. So, but the point being is everything is an attribute, and a note just happens to, much like any kind of cell in your body, stem cell in your body, is loosely connected initially by the visual nature of text and name, and by the non-visual nature, the fact that every electron in the Tinderbox universe is somehow attached and associated with every note, which is incredibly powerful, because once you get that, then your mind can get down the path of abstraction and templating and exporting and all of those other methods that we get. So now let's create ourselves an Anki note, and let's think about going about creating a project file. So I'm gonna go, just to get ourselves organized here a little bit. I'm gonna say background, because I'm just gonna move this stuff over here so we get out of the way, and then that way we can collapse this. And we'll call this one my Anki notes. And we'll go like this. And so I've got note 1. And a couple other things that I heard you say along the way. So let's now think about, let's create our Anki note template. So I'm going to go up to the file menu and click prototype. Right. And I just, out of muscle memory, I grab the person prototype because that's just the fastest way for me to do it. And I don't need person right now, so I'll just delete that. So I've got a note I'm going to call Anki, and I'm going to give it a little symbol because visually I find that useful. And what symbol do we want to give an Anki card for now? Let's just do that one. All right. So I've got some kind of card, and what we want is definitely, I think what I heard you say is like some form of citation, because we want to be able to maintain provenance of our citation of where that came from. And we very well may want file or URL. So if I'm linking to a file on my hard drive, aka PDF file, or I'm linking to a URL where the source of that information is, like a DevonThink URL to a file in DevonThink, I may want that. So these 3 attributes will help me be able to maintain provenance of the idea. Now, I believe you're how would you be using text in your Anki prototype? Is this for the answer or the question or the prompt?
Well, and again, maybe just brainstorming in my head when I originally thought of the idea, but I'd have a whole bunch of text here, say a paragraph of text on a particular topic. And what I'd like to do is be able to highlight a sentence and say, well, here's a definition or a sentence or something I typed that is going to be like that sentence is my example. Right? What is the capital of Georgia or whatever it was? And then I would say, well, here's maybe I highlight in one color, and then here's the one word I highlight that I want to be hidden and have those brackets around it. So when I export it, so I want to be able to just kind of run through quickly and go, here's definitions, here's the entire sentence in one color and maybe a highlight color. So just to make it simple, so I don't have to curate things too much.
No, okay.
A better way of doing it.
All of this is eminently doable. We may not be able to do all of it on the fly, but we'll see. This is kind of fun, actually. So, all right. So we've got an Anki card. So let's go ahead and here. And so let's say we have, anybody have I wish I had my ChatGPT up. I need a description. Can someone paste do you have an example of a paragraph that you'd want to have here? Let's play with that.
Not a paragraph, but we could probably make some. If you just grab that one I have, like the text I have in the Word file, you could probably just change 2 or 3 of them, like the capitals of. So in the example, like the capital of Georgia is Atlanta. That's a very simple definition, right? We could do some others.
Right.
The U.S. is Washington.
Michael, I have it up and running. What would you like?
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking, I wanted more than just a 5 sentences. You mentioned paragraph, so I went to paragraph.
Yeah. It could be on any topic. So.
All right. So what you're, again, and this is where we want to be thinking about, to what extent are we may or may not be overcomplicating things? Because, so here, to what is the capital of Georgia is is a prompt. And you actually want more there.
Well,
And-
technically, I guess it would
answer
be
the
that
capital
second
of Georgia.
piece. The capital of Georgia is Atlanta would be the real sentence that would be in.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. So so that's a question, and the other sentence here is the capital of
Georgia is Atlanta, and then Atlanta would be what we'd have to, format so it's hidden, right?
Sure. Now, one of the questions I have for you though is there's a couple of things going on here. This is a question and that's an answer. So in some respects, do we not have an attribute tied to our Anki card called prompt? I mean, and again, this is where let's play with our language. This could be question, this could be prompt, this could be any number of different terminology. Nod to Mr. Eddie there. Let's go ahead and hit reset. So really what we're saying is the prompt for our Anki card is that question, and the answer to our Anki card is that. And what and the fill in the blank that you want is the word Atlanta.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And then and then you could even have more complex cards, not to, make it too complex, but like even the second example, if you see just to try to see if it plays into things, the way we build this is you could have two prompts and hide two things. So if you go back to that Word file real quick, you'll see the second example has two things that are hidden. So essentially you have, what is the capital of, and then Georgia would be hidden, but then you could also have Atlanta on the same card and hidden. So you could have multiple factors or multiple facts.
All right, so let's do this. So what is the capital of? And, or actually that's a question up here. So what is the capital of and of, I'm sorry, what is the capital of is like that, right? So you're saying that is, that could be a variable in the question. And the capital of this is some answer, correct?
Right. So basically you're making people think two-dimensionally, I guess you'd say, right?
Sure.
What is the capital of
Yeah.
Georgia, right? So you're hiding Georgia and then the answer is Atlanta. So it's twofold. You could have two facts on one card that you're actually trying to understand.
Sure.
I think you can make this a lot easier by the fact that you have a fixed constraint here, and that is what Anki is expecting.
Exactly.
So what you really want to do is start with, what does this look like written in Anki input?
No, I agree.
And then,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, because otherwise we can sort of spin around a lot. But in essence, the keyhole you've got to get through is that you have got to make a template that puts the right Tinderbox attribute in the right part of the template, because with something like text, that's sort of fine for your visual consumption, but that's not going to help you in creating the that's not going to help you in sort of creating the template, because essentially every time you're having to pull something out of a long string of text, that's a self-fail. You didn't need to do that. You knew in advance that actually what you needed was, the fourth word in that sentence. So just going in and going through a lot of extra work to pull that out. So in other words, you've got a number of bits that you've got to feed into your Anki, and you will make your task much easier by working back from that fixed constraint in this case.
Right.
And that's what I was trying to accomplish with the text that I have in the Word file, Mark. Yeah. So
right. And what I'm trying to do here too is, if so let's say, let's create multiple cards. So this is an Anki fill in the blank template, for example, right? And so you want, and there's because I've been kind of listening to your requirements. So one of the things you were saying is, well, if I highlight Atlanta as, I can't remember my hotkey, so I'll just go up here. Let's say if I go, what I was hearing one of you saying is like, if I highlight Atlanta, no, sorry, didn't want to do that. Note format style, highlighting blue. So one of the things what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, if I'm reading a paragraph of text like this, and if I highlight the word Atlanta, then I want that word Atlanta to be abstracted out into something.
Well, twofold, right? So I want two colors. One is to highlight the entire sentence, or the majority of it, and that would be your entire question for Anki, right? And then highlight it in another color for the abstraction, what's going to be hidden, and that would automatically get the format that's in the Word file. two
Okay.
brackets, two colons, two close brackets at the end of the word.
Right, but Mark, Mr. Anderson, before you jump in, again, I feel like what you're in some ways, we also want to be thinking like a computer, and we want to be thinking about not over engineering complexity for the sake of having complexity. So for example, I don't need to highlight the entire text because the entire text is the entire text. And I know I certainly can highlight these two words as I'm reading, as I'm developing what I want my Anki card to work with, but I may not need to, because for me, these are different prompts, right? So this is, so if I go back to this card here, and let's say this card is called fill in the blank 1. So we'll say blank 1. And this is where it gets funky, because I'm just making up the attribute values now. But let's
And I
say,
think we're just to jump in, Michael. I think where you're going is, my assumption was it's going to be a paragraph of text, and there's going to be multiple cards generating from one paragraph of text. So in the text attribute, there's going to be multiple. Your premise is that there's going to be one sentence.
no. I mean, if there, so again, if let's say I had Lauren, that's why I was asking somebody to give me a paragraph of text, not just a sentence, right? So here is my lorem ipsum, right? So let's assume this is a paragraph of text, right? What would you want to be pulling out here?
Right. So a card might be one sentence or two sentences, and the abstraction or the thing you're hiding might be one word or multiple words within this. So you got to, like you said, thinking like a computer, you got to say, here's what the predefined, here's what my one card's going to be.
See, I think we're starting in the wrong place. I genuinely do.
I agree.
Being both simple and lazy, I see us making a rod for our own backs, because we're, for instance, I'm not even sure you can search text for give me the yellow highlight in this. And
well, you can't.
What if there are two? Realistically,
on that note, you can. Tom Diaz and I figured that.
But I mean, it's just not. So the problem we do in this is, because we can do this, then we think this is a good place to start. Again, I'm ever the pragmatist in this. I would start with what is actually simple to do. Do I have to highlight it, or am I doing it because that, it amuses me so to do? I would say, right, I've got a bit of text. I've got to split it into a number of actionable objects that I can easily pull and fit together in a little jigsaw, send through a CSV file to Anki, and it will work. That is the way I do it. Right. And I'd leave all the rest of the stylistic fluff outside the problem, because I'm just making more work.
Yeah, and I was just saying highlighting has nothing to do with cosmetics. It's for defining.
No, it is cosmetic. The point is that because the only way your system, if we
could use bold,
it is. I mean, but exactly. But the point is, it's not. It's something you can do. It's not something I would say the system is well set up to do.
Yeah, and there was, and I was saying, because I saw.
The question is, how much does it matter that you use highlighting as opposed to just splitting the text into a number of different things? I mean, this screams to me overcomplication for no value, because it's just how we imagine doing it at outset. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but my I'm very happy to be wrong on this, but I just think that I wouldn't start from this thing, because I'm just making a lot more work to get to a quite simple thing. We've got we've got something, and well, we're sort of getting there. Now you could, I mean, it's easier to imagine the highlights as you see there after you put the insertions in. But what I'm hearing described is actually not hard edged, because the next thing is someone come back, oh, actually, I want 3 green prompts and 2 purple ones. And the whole thing falls apart. I think, it helps to be a bit more hard edged in setting yourself a constraint that you can manage and working within that. Otherwise, you're always riding the edge case and always having a subpar experience.
And so to your point too, Mark, then is, so if there's a pattern, and this is the beautiful thing about Anki, the output pattern is constrained. And so the glorious thing about this particular initiative is you've got a constraint in your output. So work to that constraint. So and let's experiment. Let's create an export card of this. So we have we know there's two in this example, there's two fill in the blanks. There's blank one, there's blank two, in Atlanta and Georgia. And just for this one, we'll just make this one easier because again, if I got it, the capital of something blank is something blank, well, then that's kind of an impossible question to answer.
Well, they wouldn't be blank at the same time, but yeah.
Right, but again, we need to help Tinderbox. When do you want that blank and when do you not want that blank?
That's the difference
Right.
in close one versus close two in the code in the Word file again. So
What do you mean?
C1, C2, that I gave you, this is pretty much what Anki's expecting. So if you put C1,
but
that's the
again,
first one is hidden. And you put
for me,
C2.
doesn't mean anything until it's defined. So you've just, okay, so I got it. The terminology close one, close two actually means something, which we didn't
Yeah,
understand.
that's why it says two-fact close format. That's what Anki calls a format of this type where it's hiding something. Fill in the
Mhm.
blank is called a close.
Okay.
And if you put C1, that's the first thing that's hidden. And if you put C2, that's the second fact that's hidden.
Okay. So
Hiding
going
them at
back,
the same time.
so going back here, rather than calling this blank one, blank two, we can call this close one, close two.
Correct. Yeah.
And again, I'm totally riffing here because we're just trying to figure it out on the fly.
Yep.
So we'll go here. Beautiful thing about Tinderbox is you can change it on the fly. So we got to close one. And we
And I have no idea where close comes from, if that's an Anki only thing or if that's some kind of industry thing. I don't know.
I suspect it's an Anki only thing. Well, I mean, but it's a question, right? It seems to be a standard
It's
logical.
they have many kinds of types of cards. So they have front and back. Close is basically, where you're doing a fill in the blank essentially. And there's other types as well that I really haven't used, but there are. There's like 5 different types of basic cards.
Right. So you've got to fill in the blank here that says close one, close two. Yeah, and we'll need to create optional Booleans at some point to make it more complicated. And that, like, do you want these closed ones closed to be randomly generated, randomly swapped, all of that? For now, and for the sake of our last 20 minutes, let's pretend that close one is always fixed, and the close two is what we're going to be swapping in and out. Mr.
Just a quick point here. I've just been looking. I just put a thing in. I don't see any of this format in the actual CSV file, which is what we're trying to create. So I think what we're looking is how you write it in Anki, which is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to pass text to Anki so that
Correct.
it can assemble. So the curly bracket stuff, I don't think applies at all. Basically, we've got to work out the CSV structure that needs to go into Anki.
Yep, that's exactly what we
So
need.
before we go down a blind alley, that's all.
So let's pop that up. You got a link here for us?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the link I put in the Word file for importing, and it has the formats. But again, I was going on low speed, low drag mark where I would be copying this text afterwards and creating cards manually. So if we're doing integration, we're feeding it and we're gonna go to Anki Web because you can't do that for Anki Desktop. They're different. Then yes, providing it in this format.
Okay, fine. I mean, so
It's all good.
actually,
It's all good though.
Essentially, although two different forms of Anki have two completely different forms of ingest. I mean, that's a real world constraint that you have to decide on. I mean, we could do both, and but they'll be effectively different constructs. So the first thing really is to do the teardown of the format to decide, and you can do them for each. But the way I would do it is I would reverse back from, okay, I've got to get through a keyhole this size with this format. How do I create that? And so this is why it doesn't particularly help in terms of thinking this is how I'd mark it up. This is the question I want to ask, because that's easy and we can define that in any number of ways. But it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us with moving from the question we want to ask to the very narrow keyhole we've got to get to in terms of the input, be it pasting it into the desktop using the curly bracket method or going in CSV to the desktop to the web one.
Well,
So
yeah, and I was probably solutioning kind of what I would prefer, but again, I agree with you, Mark. But also in here, I don't know if it mentions the closed type card, and the format that has to get digested. I don't know if I see that because the most basic of a card is a front and back card, and close is a little bit more of an advanced card. So I don't know if you saw that in here when you were looking real quick.
So what is an output though, Mark? Do you see one?
I on the fly sort of know. I mean, this is a classic piece of really crap documentation. The one thing it doesn't tell you is what you have to do. It tells you all sorts of stuff that's only helpful once you know how it works. So apologies, but I mean, it is remarkably unhelpful. But we can get there.
Okay, so for the sake of moving us forward, let's try to construct a CSV file to export a card. So do we have an example of a CSV file that we need to be able to, do you have one, TBX 1513?
I do not, because whenever I've created them, and I think there's some good in the chat. I think when Trace puts something really, a whole bunch of them are in the right format that they just got from Chat GPT. But essentially, I was going to say, hey, if I could just dump all of this into a file and create them, now I'm not having to create them separately. I'm actually perusing a document, highlighting or selecting what text I want. So that was my mindset. And that's why I had the whole integration API as a second aspirational hopeful thing. But
Well, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to create a CSV file that we can just dump into a file. And in order to create that CSV file, I need to know what format, what's column A, what's column B.
right, but normally, like I'm saying, in desktop, you don't use a CSV. That's the reason why I don't have one, because I don't do an import.
Okay, so then,
for an integration, you're manually doing it, right? So
okay, so then let's go back to your Word file. What is so if we were to create an export file, you're saying this is what we need to export.
pretty much for a basic card, yeah, that's what you would have to tell. Yeah.
So let's do that. Start. So if we go back to here, where'd my Tinderbox file go here? There it is. All right. So we're saying is I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this template. I'm going to call this a Anki.
And I love while you're doing that, I love where Mark Anderson, where you were going. It'd be great to be able to export all of this and then have it digested quickly, save a whole lot of time, right? So that's the end state would be wonderful. So
But that's kind of what we're doing, right? So yeah, and there's ways to go about doing this, but let's just start with one basic card first. So this is the Anki Cloze format. And so you have text, and then you have your command line 1. So what we want to do is let's go up here and we're going to say, and again, this is where you want to think about, well, how will Tinderbox reconstruct this?
Mhm.
So I could, part of me wants to say, how are we going to break this up into its pieces? And I'm thinking on the fly. There's a part of me that wants to, create this as an attribute, that's an attribute, and I can reconstruct it that way. But let's think about this. So if we can say,
I would strongly suggest that you put all the bits you're going to use in the question, unless the question is going to be a really, really long bit of text, regardless of whether you have it in dollar text or not. That's for your visual, that's for your human understanding of the thing. I would put all the pieces neatly segmented. So you might have, whatever you call it. So piece 1 is what is a capital of with a space at the end, because don't forget you're going to concatenate. The next bit is Georgia, and your template will be basically value, value, question, and then you'll have a couple of literal open curly brackets. Then you'll have the answer inserted. Then you'll have a couple of literal curly brackets. Job done.
right, so we could do this. Right, and this is, well, this could be easier. So prompt, and then insert that.
Yeah, and you want the space, because otherwise the other thing to bear in mind when you're doing string manipulation is Tinderbox may, for sensible reasons, tend to trim leading and trailing space off.
Right, so if we go here and we say, okay, I want to now export this item. I'm now going to apply my Anki Cloze template. And the capital of Georgia is that. Okay, and then we can just now export that out as a file and you're done. And if you wanted to then make this multiple questions, let's say we go like this, and I'm going to add this in just for the sake of letting me do it quickly. We'll say Anki report. And I might name this stuff differently if I was actually thinking about it, but since I'm not, I'm just going to do it quickly. And we're going to say title. So we have one. And I'm going to say Anki reports. Anki report item. And call that one item so we can be consistent. And we'll. Great. And so that way, and the reason why I do that, now watch this, if I have multiple questions, so let's say this 2, 3, and then I want to go back here and I actually want to have a line break in between these. HTML perspective. And so then this one is going to be, what is the capital of California?
Yeah, and while you're doing that, Michael, the other thing I was trying to do, and maybe again, it's not really that possible. I was trying to make, because right here, like with everything in separate attributes and having to type it or copy and paste it, I was trying to save time and say, I've got a block of text. I just want to run through, and that's where my whole highlighting came, where I just want to kind of, I put some kind of something that can be easily identified and put into an export to save me from having to craft all of the
Right.
things you're doing individually for each and every card.
Well, I get that, but again, you know, it's and especially in the very beginning when you're starting like this, it's helpful to understand, you know, the constraint of your output.
Mhm.
You know, in the very beginning, you want to like manually construct it like this, so you can get the functions and the pieces working. And then once you have your pattern, you then can say, because I've got, as I said, for my qualitative data analysis, I do this constantly. Things in blue are quotes, things in yellow are interesting,
Then
things
dump them
are
in the
critically
attributes.
important. So once I've built my pattern, I then can have that pattern and populate the structure that I need. But if you just start with this kind of like amorphous, sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's blue, it's really hard to get to your end game.
Oh, no, and I get that. So if I confuse the conversation, yeah, apologies. But yeah, the whole goal was, I guess I just wanted to know if we can't automate that, because I thought I was hearing that earlier, if we can't automate based on like the ease of highlighting and putting it into an attribute, then
Well, you
probably
can.
not gonna save all
You
that
can,
much
you
time.
can, but I need to know what I'm automating. So if
Yep.
I go like this, right, and and we're not going to do it now because we only have about 10 minutes left. But
Yep.
if I go like this and I say, look, everything in blue, I'm gonna grab some highlighting here. So everything in blue is closed loop 1, and everything in red is, for the sake of keeping consistent. So if I say like, if it's red, I want it to be closed loop 2, and if it's blue, I want closed loop 1, and I want action code to then go through and populate those attributes automatically for me. Totally can do that.
Into separate cards, so you'd have
For
different
sure.
cards for each
For sure.
one. Yeah,
And
then it makes sense. Then
Right,
it makes
and
sense. It's
and then-
worthwhile
and then
the
I-
effort. So.
And then I go like this and I say, okay, I want, and this is my prompt. Right? You can do that.
Right.
Problem, but we need to know the structure before we start messing around
No,
with that.
and I get that. And I build things like this all the time. So I totally get that, Michael. Yep. So as long as that automation part can be done once you have the structure, then yeah, then I think it's a win-win. And I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. So
I mean, again, with action code, let's take a step back. And for those that are watching this, the incredible, beautiful, glorious thing about Tinderbox is it essentially lets you transform text. And let's not kid ourselves too. Well, what's an image and what's a video? In the context of Tinderbox, text is nothing more than, or video, images, audio files, that's nothing more than text, right? Because if it's either text referring to a note where that image exists, or it's text referring to a path to where that media asset is sitting on your hard drive. The latter is the method I prefer, because if you drop it into a note, you've like landlocked that media file in within that note. So in other words, what I'm saying is either with embed action code, external command line code, external action code, you can manipulate text in any way you want with Tinderbox. Now, sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. You might have a few incrementations to get it right. But let's say you've now got that automation working. You've got this in here. You've done all this coding. I would suspect in the end, and the reality, what you're going to find is you've highlighted that yellow piece of text. But if you really look at what you highlighted there, you're going to probably have to go manually adjust it anyway, because it might not be grammatically correct or whatever. But so then you'll go in and you'll do that manual adjustment. So now I've got my base. So what I like about this is I've got my base little text I've copied from some source document. I've gone through and highlighted the kind of stuff that I wanted to, parse through. I run the highlighting automation to pull that content out to populate my attributes. I then go manually edit it so it's exactly the way I want it when it gets produced to an Anki card. I now have my Anki report, my Anki, I'll call it report, but it should have been Cloze. Let's just fix it now, because that's what you do in Tinderbox when you don't wait, because if you wait, you never go back.
Yeah, and this is playing, because this is what I was kind of envisioning, that it would be that you could just kind of run through, and obviously you need your attributes, or what I would call variables, where you just kind of put everything. And just
Right.
so I don't know if everybody knows, but Anki also has a mobile. You have to buy the mobile. Regular Anki is free, but if people are interested, the mobile piece I think is just a one-time $25 purchase, and then you actually have it on on your phone, Android or iOS. So no plugs. I don't work for them or anything like that, but
Yeah. So we
It's
want to
convenient.
process each
Yeah.
Anki Cloze item with this prompt. I'm just making sure we got it right here. I'll just deal with the two of those for now. And why is it not? Because, okay, see, capital I, lowercase I. That's why it didn't work for me. Right? Because the computer doesn't know the difference. It's going to do what you tell it to do. So now essentially, let's look at the construct of my template here. I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, give me a title for my current report. So this is going to be my Anki Cloze cards. Okay. So, hey, Tinderbox, give me a take my Anki Cloze cards, and then I want you to process every one of the children notes with this subtemplate. And that subtemplate is going to say, grab me the prompt and then fill it in with the Cloze one. So when I do that, there you go. And then what we want to do here before I do that is let's go ahead and create a line break here. There you go. My Anki Cloze cards. The capital of Georgia is Atlanta. The capital of California is Sacramento. And now we can export that right out into a text file that you can import into Anki.
Cool.
Right. So this is just a simple example of the process of, and again, going back to what I said earlier, that is a simple example of doing this. Having whatever output you want from hundreds of notes, pulling in multimedia files from a bunch of different places, from hundreds of different attributes to get the output that you want and need. So what did you all think of this? Was this helpful today? Useful? Nice start?
I think so. I don't know.
Yes, I think it's quite helpful. I'm actually more curious about Anki, is it called too?
Yeah, Anki's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out, does it do Greek alphabet? I'm trying to run through it and I'm not finding it.
Yeah, a lot of people use it for language.
Yes, I saw that. Let me see.
Yeah. It's really popular. Originally, it was for Japanese, the person who actually created the platform.
Okay.
Yeah, so you see Nihongo, Japanese down on the bottom, or Chinese. There's a lot of different, but yeah, it's really good because space repetition. A lot of people, there's a lot of flashcard applications out there, but they don't incorporate space repetition, which is a big difference. So
I put some links in the sidebar, or in the chat rather, which is, so if you want to go the next, so having worked out the bits, having worked out the bits going into the sausage, if you're going to then you want to work through the affordance of highlights. So there's an example in the side thing there that if you want, for instance, the red highlights, that code that's there will give you the red highlights in that note's text. The thing to be aware, I think there's a full stop missing there. Actually, it should be dollar. It should be. Excuse me. I need to fix a page in ATB ref, but it should be text dot highlights. The thing you need to bear in mind, or well, I say we, the user, need to bear in mind is if you, in a fit of exuberance, have put, 2 red highlights in, and you actually meant the second one, but in your rush, you didn't think about it. Tinderbox, and yet you said use the first highlight. Tinderbox will do that. So as you step back into for instance, using something like highlights to indicate what you want to do, then you're going to need to exert some self-control. And I think where the emergent thing may come unstuck is if you're thinking, actually, what I want to do is, right, well, I'll get this paragraph of text and I'll just flag up a whole lot of questions in it. That's fine, but then you still got to do the bit of telling Tinderbox, right, which of the red highlights is the prompt for question 3 in this thing, which is why it just, to me, it smells of, it seems like ease, but it's making a rod for your own back. Actually, it's not very difficult to just split the thing up into more notes.
Hey, Mark,
It seems like, well, but it's enlightened. The way I say it's enlightened self-interest. Whatever is less work, and I think that what seems like less work is actually more work. Yeah.
And Mark, what you just put in there, I don't think it's going to work. Applying this.
No. I said there's a missing. Put a full stop after text.
Yeah, right here. Text highlights. Yeah. Okay. Got
Sorry,
it.
no, I said it's my bad. I was copying my bad sample, which I now need to go and fix.
So if we do that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
And could you loop it so that it would just for every, like, you know, I see what you're saying. You could probably just explode the notes and have separate ones. And, you know, that's probably just lesson learned for me, maybe on the best way to alleviate, or how to say, a few extra steps up front just to get the data in the format that is going to be easier to be used, right? So
I think what the thing I can see happening is you're absolutely right. It's where, you know, this note has 3 questions in it, this note has 2, and this note has something. Oh, and I also did some other highlighting for another reason I forgot about, and it's all magically gone wrong, and it's not quite clear why. I think the thing is, when you step back from it, you're going to know the stuff that you want to mark up. So it's actually, it's not quite the hardness it seems. You know what you're trying to do, so just put it into a note. The other thing is, by putting it into a note, whether you're putting 3 questions in or 1 question, and whether it's in, you know, across 1 paragraph of text or many. For instance, Tinderbox doesn't mind when you ask it for all the red highlights, it will give you a list, whether that list is 0 highlights, 1, or indeed many, and they will be listed in the order in which they occur within the run of the text.
So let's demonstrate that. So we've got another.
So as long as you are consistent in the way that you apply your different highlightings, it should all work. I would say my experience is every time I thought, what, you know, yeah, that makes eminence sense. I'll never make a mistake, and that's when I will. So to a certain extent, the less you have to say, no, I want the 3rd set rather than the other. I'm just split them into separate notes. I mean, Tinderbox doesn't mind, and actually Tinderbox works best on lots of short notes rather than notes that have, you know, lots of text in them. So as has been said, you can put the whole text of maybe Dick in there if you like. It doesn't really help you any, because you then have to look into it to find stuff you want. So just having a folder somewhere that maybe have, you know, hundreds or thousands of basically paragraphs marked up.
Mm-hmm.
That's not gonna make Tinderbox break as
well. And like you said, maybe automating as I'm reading through a paragraph, just snipping and sending them the notes, separate notes as I'm going. Mm-hmm. And then the second step is review, right? So I'm just really big, I'm a process guy, so I'm really big on just trying to minimize clicks and, you know, whatever I can, right? But I think, you know, if it's 0 error, where you have it in a separate note and you only have 1 red and 1 yellow, and it's going to make your life easier versus, oh, I forgot a red and now it threw off my whole pattern seeking, right?
Yeah, and you could even have you could have agents, you know, you could run an agent that said, you know, give me all, you know, once you know that you have and you know, the sensible thing is you set a prototype for all these things. Mm-hmm. So there's an easy way to say, Tinderbox, give me all the things that are Anki questions. And you could have an agent saying, you know, report to me any question notes that have no red highlights, or have more than 1 highlight, you know, whatever you want. So that kind of that kind of checking is not difficult to build in. I think it is the sweet spot is making offering yourself the least scope for human error.
Yeah, I agree. And then, like you said, if you use red, say first red is close 1, second red is close 2. If it's 2, and now it's always the same, right? If there is no close 2, or no second red, there is no close 2. So
and then you can then have other action code that then would split that list apart for you, and then dynamic using create, as we showed in other, then dynamically create your Anki cards for you. right? Because if I knew this, Sacramento and Atlanta, and I knew prompt close one was this, and sorry, this is getting a little wonky now, but you get the idea. In Georgia, you could have a stamp that says, hey, Tinderbox, go create me 2 cards. Take this one and match it with that one, and take this one and match it with that one, or excuse me, this one and match it with Atlanta, and this one and match it with California. As long as they're in the right order, you're good. And Tinderbox will automatically create those notes for you.
I don't know if Mark's crazy, because I thought, Mark, you were trying to get us away from that mixing it, mixing the data together, right?
Well, I do that pattern all the time. That's it's, as long as the pattern's there, it's glorious.
Yeah, it came up today. I mean, create is well, for long-standing users, it's comparatively recent. I think it was version 8 or something. But now, yeah, once you know what it is, you can go and knock out notes. The point being that what you don't want is any ambiguity downstream. You know that basically once you've marked the stuff up correctly, the whole export process to whatever form you want will just work, and you're not going to raise the hood on that ever again, hopefully. So the work is definitely on the upfront side. Once you just figured out the pattern, that works.
Right.
And the first point is basically how much variability you want, i.e., how much potential pain you want. And I would say the art of enlightened self-interest is to make that pain as little as possible.
Right. So, for example, let's go ahead and do something. Just give you a really simple example, and then we'll wrap up today. So let's say I had that, as 2 items, and now I'm going to go ahead and create a second note stamp, and I'm going to say create. What am I going to do? I'm going to say sorry. My list. Dot each X. And then I'm going to put a little semicolon there, and I'm going to 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to say create X. All right. So if I do that, no, I got to spell create right. There we go. Oh, and I got to spell my list right. There you go. And we go there, and I've got the 2 notes created. Right. And so depending on your path and your pattern, you can now, then if I put a path in there, I could say, here's my path. I don't remember the format. Is it, and actually I would typically do it this way. I would actually say variable string v note, and then I would say, and v note's going to equal, I'd say variable string v path. So now I have consistency, and then I'm going to say v note equals v path plus X, and then I'm going to say create v note for me, and v path equals this. All right. So now that I've done that, if I did it right, let's see. Oh, here. So now if I do that, I can say, okay, and I did it wrong. My path has to start at the root. Now I'm telling start at the root, go ahead and create my notes. And now if I do that, oh, sorry, I deleted my source file. Let me hit undo. There you go. These are the ones I would delete. Now at the root, I apply that. And I hit undo too many fast. Now I do it. And you'll see I've now told Tinderbox what path I want those notes to be created in. And again, then you can go nuts. Apply this, apply that prototype, pre-populate these attributes, blah, 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 blah. I mean, some of my files are sickly, they're nuts, but that's the basic structure of what you can do.
Yeah, and I guess you could even string together some of those with the, to just really automate a lot of it, right? So,
Well, yeah, and again, I'll just show you real quick on my core file here. So and working with Detlef, and I spent a lot of time on this last summer. So, you can actually pass them in as variables. So I've got a ton of variables that are passing into my note-taking method. And then if the note doesn't exist, it creates the note and applies the appropriate prototype, and based on conditions, sticks it into a different path. And if it already exists, and then it links it. And if it already exists, it just links it.
nice.
And the thing is, for those who are looking at that thinking, oh, that's a lot of code. The thing is that that's exactly the kind of thing the forum can help you with. The main thing is once you know what you want, and not in an open-ended sense that I want cookies and biscuits and everything, but no, I want one of these to turn into one of those. That's very easy for people to help anyone with. So this really more for anyone sort of watching this later. So don't be worried about seeing lots of code.
Well, and remember that code I've been working on for a long time.
Yeah.
And again, I go a bit overboard sometimes, but that's just.
And the cool thing is, but once it's done, you'll then be able to use it for a very long time. And another lovely thing about Tinderbox is it's 21 years old now, but it's managed to not break an awful lot of things whilst also adding an awful lot of features, which is something that doesn't always happen with software.
All right. Well, we ran a bit over. Big question for you all. Did we accomplish our goal and learn something today? Thumbs up.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. That's good.
Yeah, awesome.
We have to go off and celebrate the cherry blossoms now.
Nice.
I break from my usual purple in order to go do cherry blossoms.
And TBX 153, we can keep incrementing along this, but nice start for you.
Yeah, totally. I really appreciate it, guys.
Awesome.
Have a great week.
Okay. See you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.